I want to start today by having you picture a photograph. It was taken by the FBI inside a hotel room at the Canal Street Marriott in New Orleans, March of 2015.
Right.
And if you didn't know the context, you'd think you were looking at, I don't know, the prop table for some kind of bad spy movie.
Yeah.
Or maybe a prequel to Mission Impossible.
It really does have that vibe, doesn't it? It's all laid out on the bed. You're looking at a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, fully loaded.
Yep.
You see a map of Cuba just unfolded sitting right there. You see these stacks, thick stacks of $100 bills. I think it totaled something like $42,000 in cash.
Just sitting there.
And then the real centerpiece, the piece de resistance, this flesh-colored latex mask with synthetic hair that's it's absolutely terrifying to look at.
It is the ultimate getaway kit. It is the physical manifestation of a man who has been running, in one way or another for nearly 40 years.
Yeah.
But the person who packed this bag, he wasn't a cartel boss. He wasn't some career hitman or a government spook on the run.
No, not at all. He was a frail, elderly man named Robert Durst, the heir to one of the largest, most powerful real estate empires in the entire history of New York City.
And that's where the cognitive dissonance just hits you like a truck. You look at that photo, the gun, the mask, the cash, and then you look at the man himself.
And you can't make it make sense.
You just can't. And you realize we are dealing with a massive, massive contradiction. Because this is a guy who had access to the best lawyers money could possibly buy. He had a fortune that could insulate him from almost anything. And yet, this is the exact same man who, years earlier, while he's on the run for murder, with $37,000 in his trunk, gets arrested because he tried to shoplift a chicken salad sandwich and a Band-Aid from a Wegmans in Pennsylvania.
It's the central paradox of his entire life. The genius and the idiocy sitting right next to each other, constantly at war. And that is really our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just here to retell the true crime story that, a lot of people know from the HBO documentary, The Jinx. We're not just going to talk about the burping and the blinking and the creepy mutterings in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Although we will get there.
Oh, we'll definitely get there. Right. We want to look at the machinery behind the man. Because when you really start to dig into the stack of documents we have today, the trial transcripts, the psychological profiles, the DA reports, it becomes so clear that this isn't just a story about some crazy billionaire.
No.
It's a case study in what one of our sources calls procedural insulation.
That is the perfect term for it. I love that phrase, procedural insulation. It's this concept that extreme wealth doesn't just buy you a good legal defense, in the way we normally think about it.
It's more fundamental than that.
It fundamentally changes the physics of the justice system itself. It buys you a different version of reality. It creates friction, slows everything down for law enforcement, and it completely smooths the road for the suspect. We're looking at how a specific payout, $65 billion in liquid spendable assets, allowed a man suspected of 3 murders across 4 decades to navigate the legal system and, for a very, very long time, defeat it.
So let's map out where we're going to go today. Because to understand how this wealth shield, as we're calling it, actually worked and then how it eventually cracked, we have to traverse 4 really distinct eras.
4 chapters.
Exactly. We have the 1982 disappearance of his first wife, Kathy Durst. We have the execution-style murder of his best friend, Susan Berman, in the year 2000.
Then the Galveston chapter.
Right. The gruesome, almost unbelievable story in Galveston involving Morris Black. And finally, the downfall, which was really brought on by his own hubris in the Jinx.
And to understand any of that, you have to start at the foundation. Literally, the foundation. You need to look at the Durst organization.
You really do. You cannot walk through Midtown Manhattan without seeing their fingerprint. If you've walked down 3rd Avenue, if you've been through Times Square, you have passed a Durst building. It's part of this city's DNA.
It is an absolute empire. And it started in the most classic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps American way.
Right.
Joseph Durst, Robert's grandfather, he arrives in the United States in 1902. He is an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a tailor by trade.
And the lore is that he had, $3 in his pocket when he walked off the boat?
$3. The story is $3. Can you imagine?
Yeah, it's just incredible.
And by 1915, so just 13 years later, he buys his first building on 34th Street. By 1927, the Durst organization is officially founded. It's the story of the 20th century American dream, written in brick and mortar and steel.
But the figure that really looms over Robert's life isn't Joseph, the founder. It's his father, Seymour Durst.
Seymour was a titan. He really was. He took over the company in 1974. He was the guy who installed the national debt clock near Times Square. He was apparently obsessed with fiscal responsibility.
A very serious, very focused man.
Extremely. Obsessed with the legacy of the Manhattan skyline.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, just a very distant, very difficult, very cold father.
And this is where we start to see the formation of Robert's psychology.
Oh.
We have to talk about 1950. Specifically, November 8th. Robert is 7 years old.
This is the moment. The foundational trauma that defines everything that comes later. His mother, Bernice Herstein, falls or jumps, it's still debated, from the roof of their family home in Scarsdale, New York.
It was officially ruled a suicide. But the narrative around that event, that's where the wealth shield and the family mythology really start to blur together.
They do. Because the story Robert told for years, and this is the story that was dramatized in the movie All Good Things with Ryan Gosling, is just absolutely horrifying. He claims that his father, Seymour, woke him up in the middle of the night, walked him over to a window, and forced him to watch.
Just forced him.
Forced him. He said he saw his mother in her white nightgown standing on the roof, and then she was just gone.
That image. A 7-year-old boy being forced by his father to watch his mother die. I mean, it creates instant sympathy. It frames him as a victim of his father's unimaginable cruelty.
It explains everything, right?
Yeah.
It gives you a reason for why he's so broken. But we have to be so careful with that narrative.
Why?
Because Robert's brother, Douglas Durst, who runs the organization today, has been adamant for years that this is a complete and total lie.
Douglas's version is completely different.
Completely. Douglas says Robert was in his room. He says Robert wasn't forced to watch anything. Douglas argues, and has for a long time, that Robert fabricated this entire traumatic origin story to garner sympathy and to justify his later erratic and, violent behavior.
It's a classic he said situation lost to time. But regardless of whether he physically saw it happen or not, the loss of his mother and the emotional distance of his father clearly created this massive rift in him.
Oh, absolutely. And that rift eventually turned into a bitter rivalry because Robert was the eldest son. By the old world rules of primogeniture, the real estate empire was supposed to be his.
He was the heir apparent.
Right, but Robert was. Well, he was off, even from a young age. And when he was working the family business, he was just chaotic. There were reports in the files of him urinating in his brother's wastebasket in the office.
Seriously.
Seriously. He was showing up late, leaving early, just generally being a disruptor.
Yeah.
And Seymour, for all his faults as a father, was a pragmatic businessman. He needed a steady hand on the wheel of this massive company.
So in 1994, the moment of truth finally arrives. Seymour has to pick a successor. He looks at Robert, the chaotic, unpredictable eldest son, and he looks at Douglas, the steady, some would say boring, but competent younger brother. And he picks Douglas.
And Robert absolutely loses it, just completely unravels. He walks out, total estrangement from the family. He never steps foot in the office again as an employee. He becomes this phantom.
But this estrangement, it leads directly to the most important financial event in this entire timeline, the 2006 settlement.
This is the engine. This is the fuel for everything that comes next.
How's
Robert sues for his share of the family trust. It's a bitter, nasty legal battle. But eventually, to get him to go away, to just sever the ties completely and have him out of their lives, the family pays him approximately $65 million.
That is a staggering amount of money. But, plenty of people in New York have assets worth that much or more. Why is this specific payout so important to our story?
Because of one word: liquid.
Cash.
Cash. Real estate wealth is usually tied up in equity, in buildings. It's not fluid. You can't pay a high-powered criminal defense attorney in Houston with a 2% stake in Midtown office tower.
Right.
You can't use a building to post bail. You need cash. And that settlement gave Robert a war chest of liquid, accessible cash that most defendants, even very wealthy ones, simply do not have at their disposal.
It effectively weaponized his wealth. It wasn't just a number on paper anymore.
Exactly. It allowed him to hire the dream teams, we'll talk about later, in Texas and California. It allowed him to stay on the run for months, living off the grid. Without that specific payout, it's very likely the later legal defenses just wouldn't have been possible.
So we have the money, we have the trauma, we have the resentment. Now let's move to the first major crack in the shield. Or rather, the first time the shield held up when it really, really shouldn't have. 1982. The disappearance of Kathy McCormack Durst.
This is the original sin of the entire saga. Kathy was, in many ways, everything Robert wasn't. She came from a working-class family on Long Island. She was vibrant, she was smart, and she was on her way up. a fourth-year medical student at the prestigious Albert Einstein College of Medicine.
But by 1982, the fairy tale marriage, this beautiful girl and the real estate scion, had turned into a complete nightmare. I mean, the files here are just brutal to read. We're talking about serious, documented physical abuse. She was treated for facial bruises at a hospital in the Bronx just 3 weeks before she disappeared. There's a journal entry we have where she details a forced abortion back in 1976. By January of '82, she is actively looking for a way out. She's gathering documents for a divorce. She's telling friends she's terrified of him.
The timeline here is just so crucial. January 31st, 1982. It's a Sunday. She's at a friend's party in Newtown, Connecticut. She gets a phone call from Robert. Witnesses say she became visibly distressed, that they were arguing.
And she leaves.
She leaves the party. She's wearing those red sweatpants that become iconic on the missing persons posters later on. She drives back to their weekend cottage in South Salem, New York. And that is the absolute last time anyone other than Robert Durst ever sees her alive.
Now, Robert's story, the one he stuck to for decades, was that they had an argument, sure, but that he then drove her to the train station in Katona and put her on a train to go back to their Manhattan penthouse. He says she had medical school classes the next day.
And he claims he called her later that night at the apartment, and she was fine. He spoke to her. That was his story.
And for days, the police basically believe him, or at least they don't seriously press him on it. This is where that procedural insulation really meets the culture of 1980s policing.
That 2022 district attorney's report that finally came out, it calls it tunnel vision. And that's exactly what it was.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the police were fixated on the idea that maybe she'd run away, maybe with a lover, or that she was into drugs, or maybe she just needed space from a bad marriage. They didn't immediately see it as a potential homicide. Why? Well, partly because of what we call the ruse.
Okay, let's unpack the ruse, because this is so devious, and it shows a level of premeditation that is just, it's chilling.
It really is. The next morning, Monday, February 1st, the dean at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine gets a phone call. It's a woman's voice. And she says, "Hi, this is Kathy Durst. I have diarrhea. I'm sick. I won't be in today."
Just a routine call.
A routine call. The administrator doesn't think twice, marks it down as an excused absence.
And that one single phone call shifts the entire center of gravity of the investigation.
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it from a detective's perspective. In 1982, if Kathy called in sick on Monday morning from Manhattan, then she must have arrived safely in the city on Sunday night.
Which means Robert's story checks out.
It means his story checks out. It means she didn't die in the cottage in South Salem on Sunday night. It moves the timeline and the geography away from the likely crime scene and into the chaos of New York City where anything could have happened.
It bought him time. It bought him distance. It bought him credibility.
And we now know, or at least the evidence overwhelmingly suggests, that the woman on the phone wasn't Kathy Durst. Kathy was almost certainly already dead at that point.
It was Susan Berman?
Correct. This is the first link in the tragic chain connecting the victims. Susan Berman, his loyal ride-or-die friend, likely made that call from her own apartment to provide him with an alibi.
It's so frustrating to read about all the other evidence they missed back then. It wasn't just being fooled by the phone call. There were physical clues that were just ignored or not properly investigated.
They missed a lot. A cleaning woman at the South Salem cottage, she found a wood panel in the kitchen that was askew. She looked behind it, didn't see anything. But she also noticed the dishwasher. It was running.
Yeah.
But it wasn't washing dishes. It was running completely empty.
That's weird.
It's very weird. But when the police finally looked at it days later, they found nothing because it had been cleaned. However, that same cleaning lady reported seeing what she thought were red stains, maybe blood stains, on the appliance earlier. And then there's the trash.
The neighbor sees Robert throwing things out.
Not just things.
Yeah.
He sees him cramming Kathy's medical textbooks into the trash compactor.
That is the detail that gets me every single time. If your wife is missing and she is a fourth-year medical student on the brink of becoming a doctor, you do not throw away her textbooks. That is her life's work.
It makes no sense.
You only throw those away if, for an absolute fact that she isn't coming back to use them.
It is behavioral evidence of the highest order. It just screams consciousness of guilt.
Yeah.
But because he was Robert Durst, because he walked into the precinct in a nice suit with a high-priced lawyer, the police deferred.
Right.
They didn't lock down the cottage immediately. They didn't bring in forensics. They didn't search the septic tank. They just sort of assumed rich guys don't kill their wives in their fancy country houses.
And by the time they realized they probably should have looked a little closer, weeks had passed. The trail was ice cold. He gets a divorce from his missing wife in 1990 without even telling Kathy's family, which is just another layer of cruelty.
Unbelievable.
And he moves on.
He moves on. But he leaves a loose end, a very dangerous loose end.
Susan Berman.
Susan is such a fascinating, tragic character in this whole saga. You really can't understand Robert's decades of survival without understanding Susan.
She wasn't just a college buddy from UCLA. I mean, her background was unique. She was basically mob royalty.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Her father was Davy Berman, known as Davy the Jew. He was a partner of Bugsy Siegel. He helped run the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas for the mob.
Yeah.
Susan literally grew up in that world. She even wrote a memoir about it called Easy Street.
And that upbringing, it had to have shaped her moral compass, right?
Absolutely. In her world, loyalty was the only currency that mattered. You protect your friends, you never ever talk to cops, and you accept that sometimes bad things happen to people and you just look the other way.
So she had a different code.
A completely different code.
Yeah.
And she and Robert, they bonded over this shared trauma. Both had mothers who died violently and mysteriously, and both had powerful, terrifying fathers. They saw themselves as these two lost souls with trust funds.
So back in 1982, when Kathy vanishes, Susan steps up. She essentially becomes his press secretary, his defender.
She was the gatekeeper, 100%. She was the one barking at reporters on the phone, keeping them away from Robert. She was the one planting stories in the press that Kathy might have run off with a drug dealer or something.
Ooh.
And, as we discussed, she was almost certainly the voice on the phone to the medical school. She was his alibi.
But let's fast forward 18 years to late 2000. The world has changed. The Westchester DA at the time, Janine Pirro, decides to reopen the Kathy Durst cold case. They're looking at the files with fresh eyes. They see the note about that mysterious phone call, and they think, we need to talk to Susan Berman.
And Robert knows this. He knows they're coming for her. He's been sending Susan money for years. $25,000 here, $50,000 there. She was broke, living in this rundown house in Benedict Canyon in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But now she's not just a charity case anymore. She's a liability.
And Robert Durst, if he's anything, he is transactional.
Exactly. When an asset becomes a liability, you liquidate it. On December 23, 2000, just 2 days before Christmas, Susan is found dead in her home. A single gunshot to the back of the head.
Execution style.
And no forced entry. The dogs didn't bark. Her wallet was on the counter. She let the killer in. She turned her back on him. This is the hallmark of a killing by someone the victim knows and trusts implicitly.
But look at what he does immediately after. This is where that arrogance, that narcissism really starts to peek through the cracks. He wants her body to be found. He doesn't want her to just rot there for weeks.
Right. He needs it to be official.
So he sends a note to the Beverly Hills Police Department.
The infamous cadaver note.
It's so bizarre, just a plain envelope. Inside, a piece of paper with her address written on it and one single word in all caps, block letters. Cadaver.
It's this incredible mix of cold pragmatism and blinding narcissism. He's pragmatic. I want the death confirmed so the loose end is officially tied off. But it's also narcissistic. I'm so much smarter than these cops. I can send this note and they will never, ever catch me.
He thought he could remain anonymous.
He didn't realize he was planting the forensic seed of his own destruction. That note just sat in that evidence locker for 15 years, like a ticking time bomb.
So Susan is gone. The heat is rising in New York. And Robert does something that I still have trouble fully visualizing. He runs to Galveston, Texas, and he becomes a woman.
This begins the most surreal chapter of the entire story. It's November 2000. He arrives in Galveston. He rents a cheap apartment in a rundown boarding house for $300 a month. But he doesn't rent it as Robert Durst, billionaire.
No.
He rents it as a mute woman named Dorothy Center.
I mean, just picture this for a second. A billionaire real estate scion from New York, in a wig and a dress, pretending to be mute, living in a $300 a month room in Galveston.
He communicates with the landlord exclusively through handwritten notes. He's living in what is, for him, total squalor. This just highlights the erratic, panicked nature of his flight. He wasn't just hiding from the law. He was trying to completely vacate his own identity. He wanted to disappear into the floorboards of America. He just wanted to be a nobody.
But he couldn't shed his violence. He couldn't run from that. Enter Morris Black.
Morris Black was his neighbor across the hall. A cranky 71-year-old loner. By all accounts, not an easy guy to get along with. They formed this odd couple friendship. They'd watch TV together, hang out. But on September 28, 2001, Morris ends up dead.
Now, Durst's story, the one he sticks to through the entire trial, is self-defense. He says he came home, found Morris Black in his apartment watching TV without permission. They argued. He claims Black grabbed Durst's own target pistol. They struggled, they fell to the floor, and the gun went off accidentally, shooting Black in the face.
Okay, let's pause and assume for 1 second that every word of that is true.
Right.
A normal person, a rational person calls 911. Oh my God, there was a terrible accident. My neighbor has been shot. Send an ambulance.
Robert Durst does not call 911. He goes to the local hardware store, he buys a paring knife, he buys 2 different kinds of saws, he buys an axe.
And he proceeds to dismember the body in his own apartment. He packs the parts into garbage bags and dumps them off a pier into Galveston Bay, but he didn't weigh the bags down properly.
A fatal mistake.
A torso floats to the surface and is found by a kid who's fishing. And inside one of the bags, the police find a newspaper with the address of the boarding house on it.
So they go to the boarding house?
They go there. They find a trail of blood leading directly to Durst's apartment. They find the saw. They find evidence everywhere.
He gets arrested, posts bail with cash, and immediately skips town. That's when he gets caught in Pennsylvania for stealing the chicken salad sandwich. It's a circus. But let's fast forward to the trial in 2003. He is back in Texas. He is facing a murder charge. He openly admits to cutting up the body. And this is where the wealth shield reaches its absolute, undeniable pinnacle.
The Galveston acquittal. It's the Super Bowl of criminal defense. It's what lawyers study.
But how? Just how? How does a jury look at a man who chopped up his neighbor and say, not guilty?
It's a masterclass in how money doesn't just buy lawyers, it buys a narrative. He hired Dick DeGuerin and Mike Ramsey. These guys are absolute legends in the Texas legal scene. They cost a fortune. And they constructed a defense that was, from a legal standpoint, technically perfect.
So what was the strategy?
They had 2 main hurdles to overcome. The body and the behavior. First, the body.
What about the body?
The head was never recovered. The torso was found, the limbs were found, but Morris Black's head was gone. And that was crucial. That meant the prosecution could not prove the trajectory of the bullet. They couldn't scientifically prove it wasn't an accident that happened during a struggle, just like Durst claimed.
So it's just Durst's word against a dead man.
Exactly. And the burden of proof is on the prosecution. But
Right.
then you have the behavior, the dismemberment. How do you explain to a jury of 12 regular people that a man who accidentally shot his friend then decided to chop him up with an axe? That just screams guilty conscience.
That's the part that seems impossible to explain away.
So they bring in the Asperger's defense. They hired a psychiatrist, Dr. Milton Altschuler. He spent 70 hours examining Robert Durst, and he diagnosed him with Asperger syndrome, what we would now call autism spectrum disorder.
And the argument was that his autism made him dismember the body. That sounds offensive, frankly.
The argument was much more subtle, and that's why it was so brilliant. They didn't say autism makes you violent or makes you a killer. They argued that because he is neuroatypical, when the gun went off and Morris Black was dead on his floor, he didn't experience the emotional panic a neurotypical person would.
What did he experience?
He experienced a pragmatic crisis. He thought, I have a dead body. I am Robert Durst. I am already suspected of killing my wife. The police are after me. No one in the world will ever believe this was an accident, so I need to get rid of the problem.
They argued the dismemberment wasn't an act of a guilty man, but a logical, if gruesome, solution to a problem driven by his specific neurological condition.
And it worked. It gave the jury a hook to hang their hat on, and the prosecution made a fatal error. They went all in on first-degree murder, intentional killing. They didn't offer the jury lesser charges like manslaughter or evidence tampering as a primary charge.
They overplayed their hand.
Massively. So the jury looked at the evidence and said, we can't prove the killing was intentional beyond a reasonable doubt. The dismemberment is awful, it's horrific, but he's not on trial for dismemberment. He's on trial for murder. And they acquitted him.
So he walks, again. He serves a little bit of time for evidence tampering and bail jumping, but essentially he gets away with dismembering a human being.
It was a shock to the entire nation. And it demonstrated that if you can afford to tell a complicated story, and you can afford the expensive experts to back that story up, you can override common sense in a courtroom.
And this is where his hubris just takes over completely. He feels invincible. He beat the system in the most spectacular way possible. He feels immune. And that feeling of immunity is what leads him to destroy himself.
The jinx.
Why did he do it? That is the question everyone always asks. Why would a man who just got away with murder and is suspected of another one invite a documentary crew into his life.
Narcissism. Pure and simple. There's no other explanation. He saw the Ryan Gosling movie All Good Things, which was a fictionalized version of his life, directed by Andrew Jarecki. And Robert, he actually liked it. He apparently cried watching it. He thought, this guy gets me.
He felt seen.
He felt seen. So he called Andrew Jarecki and said, I want to do a documentary. I want to tell my side of this story.
He wanted to control the narrative one last time. He thought he was smarter than Jarecki. He thought he could charm the camera and convince the world of his innocence.
But he didn't know that Jarecki and his team weren't just directors anymore. They were becoming investigators. And the breakthrough, the thing that finally broke the case open after 30 years, it didn't come from the police. It came from Susan Berman's stepson.
Sareb Kaufman.
Sareb is going through old boxes of Susan's stuff. And he finds a letter that Robert wrote to Susan back in 1999, a year before she was killed.
And this is the forensic breakthrough, the smoking gun that had been hiding in plain sight. Let's go back to the cadaver note that was sent to the police.
Right. It was written in block lettering. And it had a very specific, very unusual misspelling. It spelled Beverly Hills with an extra E in Beverly. Beverley.
An easy mistake to make, but a consistent one. And the letter the stepson found that Durst wrote to Susan.
Same block lettering. Same unique misspelling. Beverley.
The scene in the documentary where they show him the two envelopes side by side, it is unmatched in television history. The heir just leaves the room. You can see the panic in his eyes. He looks at them. He blinks that weird blink of his. And he literally says on camera, I can't tell you which one I wrote.
He was completely and utterly trapped. His own handwriting betrayed him. His lawyers must have been screaming at their TV screens. But he had already signed the release forms. He had already waived his rights. He had walked right into the trap.
And then the bathroom break, the finale.
The hot mic confession. March 14th, 2015. He finishes that brutal interview about the handwriting. He's clearly stressed, agitated. He goes to the bathroom, and he forgets he's still wearing the microphone.
And we, the audience, hear that horrifying muttered monologue. There it is, you're caught.
Yeah.
What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course.
Chills every single time I hear it. Now, legally, there was a huge debate about this. The defense argued this was an edited, incoherent rambling of a stressed-out old man who's just talking to himself. The prosecution argued it was a subconscious confession, the truth finally bubbling to the surface.
But in the court of public opinion, it was over. The case was closed right there.
It was. And it absolutely catalyzed the arrest. The day before that finale aired, the FBI, who had been tipped off by the filmmakers, grabbed him at that Marriott in New Orleans with a latex mask and the map of Cuba and the stacks of cash.
He was literally about to run again.
He was minutes away from disappearing, probably to Cuba. The Weld Shield was about to deploy one last time to get him out of the country. But the media, his own project, beat him to it.
So finally, we get to the trial in Los Angeles. It takes 5 long years to get there. It's delayed by constant legal motions, his failing health, and of course, COVID. But in 2021, he finally stands trial for the murder of Susan Berman.
And the strategy here from the prosecution was completely different. The prosecutor, John Lewin, he didn't just try him for killing Susan. He basically put him on trial for killing Kathy, too. He argued it was all one long killing spree. He argued that Susan was killed because she knew what happened to Kathy.
And the star witness was a man named Nick Chavin. This was a friend of both Robert and Susan, a mutual friend.
Chavin's testimony was absolutely devastating for the defense. He testified that in 2014, outside a restaurant in New York City, he finally worked up the courage to ask Robert about Susan. And Robert looked at him dead in the eye and said, it was her or me, I had to.
It was her or me. That just strips away the Asperger's defense. It strips away the it was an accident defense. That is a cold, calculated admission of motive.
And Durst, in the courtroom, tried to play the sympathy card one last time. He appeared every day in a wheelchair. He had a shaven head from a medical procedure. His voice was weak and frail. At one point, he held up his catheter bag in court to show the jury how sick he was.
The frail old man routine. But then he made a fatal error. He decided to take the stand in his own defense. And the nice old man act just completely fell apart.
It really did. He was combative. He was arrogant. When the prosecutor asked him about Kathy, he showed zero emotion, zero remorse. He admitted on the stand to lying to the police in the past. He absolutely destroyed his own credibility in front of the jury.
And the verdict finally came down. Guilty. First-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It felt like justice, finally, after 40 years.
Well, yes and no. And this is where the legal system throws us one final, unbelievable curveball.
Right, because he didn't live for very long after the verdict was read.
No, he died on January 10th, 2022. Natural causes and complications from COVID. He was 78 years old. But because he died while his case was actively being appealed, and every felony conviction in California is automatically appealed, a strange legal doctrine kicked in.
Abatement ab initio.
Exactly. It's Latin for abatement from the beginning. Under California law at the time, if a defendant dies before their appeal process is fully resolved, the conviction is vacated. It is wiped from the record as if it never happened.
So you're telling me that, legally speaking, Robert Durst died an innocent man?
Technically, in the eyes of the law, yes. The court dismisses the case entirely. It returns the defendant to the legal status they had before the trial began.
That is just, it's incredibly painful for the families, for the McCormack family, for the Berman family, after waiting 40 years to have the guilty stamp officially erased.
It denied them that finality of a legal judgment on the public record. Now, the facts didn't change. The jury's decision happened. We all saw it. The evidence is still there. But in the cold, hard text of the law, the wealth shield held up one last time, even from beyond the grave.
But there was some measure of post-mortem justice, wasn't there?
There was. The Westchester DA, a woman named Miriam Roca, released a report posthumously indicting him for Kathy's murder. It was symbolic, of course, he couldn't be tried, but it put all the evidence against him on the public record for history. And the McCormack family is still pursuing civil suits against his estate and his second wife.
Let's talk about her for just a second. Deborah Chariton. We haven't mentioned her much, but she's a key figure.
She's a ghost in this story, but a very, very rich one. She was his second wife. They married in a secret ceremony in 2000, right before the Berman murder and right before he went on the run.
And many of the sources we've looked at describe it as a purely transactional arrangement.
That seems to be the consensus. She got control of his finances. She was given power of attorney. She was the one moving the money around while he was a fugitive, living as Dorothy Sunner. In exchange for that loyalty, she's the primary beneficiary of his estate. She's the one holding the keys to the fortune today. And she has never, ever spoken publicly about what she knew or when she knew it.
So the money is still there. The shield protected the assets in the end, even if it couldn't save the man.
Precisely. The fortune survived.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. We've gone from the tailored suits of the Durst organization in 1927 to the terrifying latex mask of 2015. It's an American epic, in a way, a story of money, trauma, and a justice system that just couldn't catch up for decades.
It really is a story about the limits of justice when confronted with unlimited resources. And here's the question I kind of want to leave you, the listener, with. We know about the handwriting. We know about the hot mic confession. We credit the documentary with finally catching him. But consider this for a moment. If Robert Durst had simply never made that phone call to Andrew Jericho, if he had been content to sit in his luxury apartment, collect his millions from the family trust, and just stay silent, would he have died a free man?
The evidence suggests, yeah, he probably would have.
The police had stopped looking. The cases were ice cold. The wealth shield was completely intact. It wasn't the police who broke it in the end. It wasn't the courts. It was his own bottomless narcissism. He needed to be the star of his own show. And that need for attention was the only thing powerful enough to finally dismantle the fortress of protection his money had built around him.
A terrifying thought. He told on himself because he just couldn't help it.
Sometimes the only person who can catch a man like that is the man himself.
Wow. Well, that is a lot to process. Thank you for taking us through that legal and psychological labyrinth.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating and tragic case.
And thank you to you, our listener, for diving deep with us. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one.